Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott. For our main topic today, we'll be talking about Ntsb 830, which student pilots are required to receive instruction on, and all pilots should know about. We'll talk about what it is and what you should remember about it if you are ever involved in an accident or incident. Last week in episode 143, we talked about wind shear, so if you didn't hear it, you might want to check it out. And if you haven't done so already, please click that subscribe button in whatever app you're listening to us now. That helps other people find our show when you do that, and it downloads new shows automatically to your phone. Also, it doesn't cost you a thing. Absolutely zero to hit the subscribe button, so please do it now. This week in the news, the FAA has just extended the expiration date on medicals, but there's a gotcha, and we'll tell you about that. 2 GA aircraft manufacturers are now making medical mask and ventilator parts. And Jet Blast flips over a hangar and a Cessna, and we'll tell you how that happened. All this and more, and the news starts now. From AOPA.org, the FAA took decisive action on March 26 to protect pilots whose livelihoods face further disruption in the form of expiring certifications during the global pandemic. The notice states that from March 31st through June 30th, 2020, the FAA will not take legal enforcement action against any person serving as a required pilot crew member or flight engineer who holds a medical certificate that expires within this time period. This action allows doctors, such as those who are appointed as FAA examiners, to be utilized elsewhere where the need is greater during the current pandemic. With this action, the FAA is exercising our enforcement discretion while still maintaining the highest level of aviation safety in the national airspace system. Well, that's great, but there is one little gotcha, and this comes from Bill Behan. He's the CEO of AOPA's insurance partner, Assured Partners Aerospace, which provides insurance. He says it is possible that flying without a current or valid medical may jeopardize the validity of your aircraft insurance policy. Behan surveyed insurers that they write policies for. He said insurance companies offered, quote, sympathetic responses to pilots' challenges in renewing their medical certificates, but none were willing to state that the FAA's decision to not enforce pilot medical requirements would override or alter their company's policy wording in any way. So, if your medical is due to expire in the next 3 months, you may want to check your insurance policy before you go flying. And from aviationpros.com, Garmin announces a virtual Sun & Fun and Aero Friedrichshafen experience with Aviation Webinar Series. Garmin is pleased to announce it's hosting a series of aviation webinars. By the way, I think these were all the ones that they were planning to present at these shows that have now been canceled. They say Garmin is bringing an educational lineup of webinars to its customers, ranging from an overview of its latest products, such as the GI-275 and the GTN XI series, to cost-effective autopilot upgrades. These free webinars offer pilots and customers a broad overview of the latest Garmin has to offer, while also providing an overview of its vast product lines. The webinars have already started. They run through April 3rd. I contacted Garmin and they said they do plan to archive them for playback later. You can find links to all these webinars at garmin.com/SNF2020 and garmin.com/AERO2020. And of course, we'll have links to these in our show notes. And separately, my friends at Garmin tell me that they've just created a Keep Healthy with Garmin challenge on social media, and they've created the hashtag 10K a day. This is a fun global challenge where they're asking Garmin associates and customers to step up their at-home routines and hit 10,000 steps a day. They're suggesting we do that for 30 days. Participation, they say, is easy. There's absolutely nothing you need to do to sign up for this. Just go onto Instagram and post a photo showing off your 10,000 steps. It can be a simple wrist photo of your step count or something unique. They say have fun. And if you would include the hashtag 10K a day, and tag at Garmin in your post so they can reshare. And then they say in your post tag 3 friends, challenge them to take the 10K a day challenge. And they say whether it's laps around the kitchen table or a safe neighborhood walk, which is what I'm doing, we look forward to seeing the 10K a day challenges. So I'm going to go ahead and try this challenge because I've mentioned to you before, I've picked up a few pounds here sheltering at home on what's now day 22 for me, more than 3 weeks sheltering at home. And by the way, if you would, go ahead and follow me on Instagram at Aviation News Talk, where you can see my photos, or on Facebook, where I've just set up a new page for this podcast at facebook.com/Aviation News Talk. That's all one word. From avweb.com, Piper to manufacture medical face shields. Well, this is a heartwarming story. Piper Aircraft announced it will begin making protective gear to support the Cleveland Clinic Indian River Hospital in Vero Beach, Florida, which of course is where their manufacturing plant is located. According to Vero Beach-based Piper, its manufacturing engineering team designed a prototype face shield using off-the-shelf materials. Once the prototype was approved, the team created a manufacturing line at Piper Factory and sourced materials from wholesale suppliers. Piper Chief Operations Officer James Funk said, "It's a time for action, cooperation, and collaboration. As a team, we can make a difference for people in need and directly support those fighting the battle on the front lines of this unprecedented crisis. We want healthcare providers, especially, and patients to be safe. Therefore, it's vital that we all pull together to help our community weather this crisis and come out the other side stronger." Piper says its current supply of materials and labor give it the ability to produce thousands of face shields daily. The company will begin production this week. Piper is also donating 1,395 approved masks to the hospital. And separately, Brazilian jet manufacturer Embraer has announced a program to produce parts for ventilators and respirators, replace imported components for ventilators, develop high-efficiency filtration systems for transforming regular hospital beds into intensive care beds, and study methods of developing portable respirators aimed at rapid availability. And I just learned that Wheels Up, which is a membership-based charter company, has teamed up with NFL star quarterback Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks for a $10 million meal donation to hunger relief organization Feeding America. Feeding America is a nonprofit serving about 40 million people facing hunger in all 50 states. And their concern is that during the current COVID-19 crisis, the number of people going hungry will increase. So congratulations to all three of these companies for stepping out to help in this time. And from ABC7news.com, that's our local ABC7 affiliate here in the San Francisco Bay Area, pilot on mission to fly COVID-19 testing kits from Hayward to Los Angeles. It says that a Cessna 402 took off from Hayward Executive Airport in the middle of the night, headed down to Southern California packed full of coronavirus test kits. Pilot Kevin Perry said they have to get there. There's just no question about it. The last couple of nights, he said his plane has been packed to capacity, carrying coronavirus test kits from Quest Diagnostics. The swabs are from anxious patients in the Bay Area and other parts of Northern California waiting to learn if they've tested positive for the virus. It's an urgent mission with little time to spare. All of these test kits are under a time constraint, said Perry. If they sit here too long, they could go back and then they have to be retested. From engine to start, I'm out of here in 5 minutes. Every night just before midnight, 50 green bags stuffed with kits are packed into his plane headed to labs in LA to be analyzed. I fly them down to labs that are waiting for all of these kits at 2 a.m., said Perry. It's got to be tested for somebody down the road that needs treatment. Perry stressed the efficiency of flying the kits down to Southern California instead of driving them. He said the flight path only takes him 90 minutes compared to a 6-hour drive, and that's with a little traffic. It's the finale of the testing. That's what I accomplish, is getting the tests to the lab so they can get the results in a timely fashion. And if you're aware of any other stories where general aviation is involved in the current COVID-19 crisis, please let me know about that and we'll pass those stories along. From airport-technology.com, COVID-19, the U.S. announces a stimulus package for GA airports. The $2 trillion stimulus package announced to aid the economy during the COVID pandemic includes $100 million for GA airports. This amount is also expected to help in maintaining the access of small and rural communities to aviation services. Funding provides to GA airports as part of the $10 billion emergency appropriation allocated to airports in the stimulus plan. The funds will be issued from the general fund and not from the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. The money can be used by the airports for any purpose on which, quote, airport revenue may be lawfully spent. This funding does not require any local match, as the share from the federal government will be 100%. Non-hub and small airports were exempt from a clause to require airports that receive funding to retain a minimum of 90% of their workforce until the end of 2020. From StarTribune.com, I believe that's a Duluth newspaper, Cirrus Aircraft will be slowing down operations and putting some employees on furlough. The number of affected employees was not made available. Cirrus has about 1,000 employees in Duluth. The furloughs will start Monday and last 4 weeks, and the company said it will provide significant benefits, including compensation and health care coverage support. This measured plan brings stability while providing employees, suppliers, partners, and the company overall the flexibility to return in the changing environment while positioning Cirrus for a return to growth soon, the company's statement said. Cirrus also has operations in North Dakota, Tennessee, and Texas with a total of about 1,600 employees across all 4 locations. From AOPA.org, aircraft market reacts to the coronavirus. And here we're talking about the market for new and used aircraft. It says the phones at financial institutions that make aircraft loans suddenly went quiet. The aviation industry's response to the spread of the coronavirus in the U.S. in March was swift and dramatic. The seller's market in GA aircraft suddenly ended, and this downturn felt different from previous ones. Jason Zilberbrand, president of VREF, which is an aircraft valuation firm, said, "What we're seeing now is unprecedented. The closest thing to it was 9/11, but then within 18 months, things were largely back to normal. No one knows how our current situation is going to play out." Zilberbrand said he hasn't seen fire sales yet among sellers of piston GA aircraft, where valuations for some models, particularly single-engine trainers, have skyrocketed in the last 2 years, but he does expect the rate of increase to take a breather. They've had a phenomenally good run in the single-engine market, he said. That's not going to stop as long as training demand continues to be strong. One aspect of the current situation that differs from the Great Recession, which reached its nadir in early 2009, is that banks seem less anxious to repossess assets this time around. We've all learned so much from 2008 and 2009, he said. The biggest question for the aviation community and the world is how long the virus-induced downturn will last. Aircraft manufacturers could also face stiffer competition from the used market if the price of used aircraft falls. The gap in price between a new airplane and a used one would be simply too much for buyers to justify, even if new airplanes offer better efficiency and lower hourly operating cost. Zilberbrand says VREF is anticipating a relatively quick return to the status quo, or at least something resembling the status quo. He says, "The bottom line is that we all hate change and we don't adapt to it well. People enjoy their previous lives and they want to get back to visiting friends and family and going on adventures. The sky hasn't fallen, and we don't see this having a major long-term effect on the aircraft market or the broader community." From flyer.co.uk, Pipistrel and EASA announced world's first type-certified electric aircraft. Well, that was the headline that was posted on the Flyer magazine website a few days ago, but now it's gone, and the associated video with it is now marked private and can't be viewed, which makes me wonder what happened. Regardless, it suggests that Pipistrel must be close to certification and that for some reason it's been delayed. Here's what the story did say when it was available. The handover of the type certificate from the EASA agency to Pipistrel founder and CEO Ivo Boscaro was to have taken place at Aero Friedrichshafen next week, but with that show canceled, it's now likely to happen once the current coronavirus restrictions are lifted. Flyer had a video call with Ivo Boscaro today, Friday the 27th of March, in which he talks about, and then it gives a long list of things, how he worked with a special team of engineers at EASA to certificate the VELIS, that's VELIS, and how EASA helped every step of the way, how many of the world's top flight schools have already placed orders for the electric VELIS, including Air France, how Pipistrel is coping with having facilities in both Slovenia and just over the border with Italy during the coronavirus pandemic, how the Pipistrel Panthera 4 to 5 seat aircraft is to go into production as a type-certified aircraft with MOGAS burning engine and later with hybrid electric power, and finally how his passion for flying took hold of his life. And then they give some fast facts on the Pipistrel VELIS Electro 600. Has 2 seats with dual controls. It has a 60 kilowatt electric water-cooled engine, 3-blade propeller with a ground-adjustable pitch. It has 2 batteries that are water-cooled and a nominal capacity of 24.8 kilowatt hours. It also has an onboard charger. Now that sounds kind of interesting. It says charge time from empty is 70 minutes, typical charge time 40 minutes, wingspan 34.5 feet. And it says that the Pipistrel VELIS Electro will be the world's first type-certified electric aircraft. It's based on Pipistrel's experimental Alpha Electro and the already certified airframe of the Cirrus SW121. The aircraft already has a filling order book with a launch customer, a flight school in Switzerland, which had ordered 18 of the Pipistrel Pantheras. Pipistrel has been working on the Panthera for many years, but the design has now been frozen, the power unit chosen, and it's going to go into production. So it sounds like good things coming out of Pipistrel. And from AOPA.org, eFlyer gets Garmin Glass. By Aerospace announced its 2-seat eFlyer 2, which will come equipped with a full complement of Garmin G3X Touch avionics. The package will include VFR and IFR capability, GPS, transponders, and standby instruments. George Bai, CEO of Bai Aerospace, said, Bai Aerospace continues to mature the integration of the G3X avionics with a next-generation instrument panel and electric propulsion system for the eFlyer 2. We are working closely with Garmin to produce the safest, most reliable, and most innovative electric pilot training aircraft ever produced. The airplane's first flight was on April 10, 2018 at Denver's Centennial Airport. A 4-seat variant, the eFlyer 4, will be certified for IFR operation. The $349,000 eFlyer 2 uses a 90-kilowatt, 120-horsepower Siemens SP70D electric motor, powered by up to 6 lithium-ion battery packs, although tests of lithium-sulfur batteries have been announced as lighter, more durable, and longer-lasting alternatives. The eFlyer 2's maximum cruise speed is projected to be 135 knots. Its maximum endurance is targeted at 3.5 hours of flight time, and its initial rate of climb is 1,050 feet per minute. Its empty weight is set at 1,460 pounds, and its max gross takeoff weight will be 1,900 pounds. The plane will be certified under Part 23. In April 2019, By Aerospace had already received 300 orders for electric aircraft, and in October, Quantum XYZ placed an order for several hundred aircraft, including the eFlyer 2 and eFlyer 4 models. And finally, from avweb.com, Jet Blast overturns hangar. Now, this story actually came to me along with a video a couple of days before it appeared on the internet. It came from a listener to the show who's in San Luis Obispo, and his son was at the airport with a friend who shot this impressive video in which a jet is running up its engines and it blew over a T hangar. The hangar was destroyed and light aircraft were damaged at San Luis Obispo by the jet blast from an American Eagle CRJ. The airline was testing an engine on the aircraft, and it worked well enough to flip over at least one partially dismantled and parked Cessna. And the listener sent me photos of that separately. It looked like it's a 150, which is upside down. And of course, they also turned over a hangar on the GA ramp. Some aircraft in the hangar were damaged and other structures were damaged, according to KSBY News. There were no injuries. A video taken by local residents shows the RJ at the end of the runway with at least one engine running at high power, with a blast directed at a ramp where several light aircraft were tied down. The hangar's doors were open and facing the jet blast, which got under the building and blew it over on its back. There's been no comment from American Eagle, and the damage total wasn't immediately available. But I will just say this. Pilots, you are responsible for your jet blast or your prop wash, so before you start your engine or before you run up to full power, look to see what's behind you before you blast away. And that's the news for this week. Coming up next, my updates. And then later, we'll be talking about Ntsb 830, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's get to a few updates. As I finished recording the news, I read that Sun & Fun organizers have just decided to cancel the event for this year. Originally, they had postponed it from April until early May. Also, earlier today, the governor of Florida issued a stay-at-home order for the entire state through the end of April. That undoubtedly had some impact on the organizers' decisions. Frankly, I think it makes a whole lot of sense. Shelter at home seems to be working. So no need for us to all run out together and make things worse. We'll look forward to Sun & Fun next year. Now let's listen to a fun flying destination.
Hi, Max Jackson from Minnesota for another fun flying destination. For an interesting experience and a good cross-country flight from the Twin Cities, I can recommend the SPAM Museum in Austin, Minnesota. The airport identifier is Kilo Alpha Uniform Mike. The FBO is quite nice, and a crew car is available for use. Avgas is usually reasonably priced, and the FBO appreciates the purchase. From the airport, the museum is about a 10-minute drive to the west. Visitors will likely be surprised to discover several of the unique ways in which SPAM has played a role in the U.S. and world history. The museum is kid-friendly, and they often have samples available. The gift shop is also worth a visit, as they have many SPAM-related products. If you want more than SPAM samples for food, there is also an excellent barbecue place right across the street called Piggy Blues Barbecue. Granted, it's still pork-themed, and they do offer SPAM fries, but there are other food choices as well. So hopefully your listeners will check out the SPAM Museum as they traverse across the northern Midwest. So that's another fun flying destination in the land north of Toronto.
Well, thank you so much, Jackson. I didn't realize there was a SPAM museum out there with free samples, no less, so that's great. Hey, anybody who's sitting at home, and I know about 80% of the U.S. population is now under a shelter-at-home order, we are just about to run out of recordings for fun flying destinations. I've got just one in reserve. So I'd like to ask you to go ahead and use either the Voice Memos app on your smartphone, Go ahead and record a fun flying destination about an airport near you that you're familiar with and that you love, and then email that to me at aviationnewstalk@gmail.com, or just go out to our website at aviationnewstalk.com, click on listener question at the top of the page, and that will let you record up to 90 seconds. And thank you so much for your help. Hey, if you are a pilot or flight instructor, you know it's pretty hard to work at home. However, there is a hilarious video that's circulating on YouTube about a flight attendant working at home. It's extremely well written, and essentially a lady flight attendant is driving her husband crazy as she treats him as if she were at work in the plane, rather than, of course, he's sitting there on his laptop, sitting on the couch and things like that. I got to say, I burst out laughing at several points in the video, and I think you will too. And of course, I've put a link to it in our show notes. And if you don't know what that means when I say the show notes, if you're listening to us on a smartphone or in whatever app you're listening to us in, you should be able to just touch your finger to the app and swipe the artwork upward, or in some cases to the side, to find the show notes, which include links to that video and also links to where you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. And at those places, you're often going to find out things that I'm talking about on the podcast even sooner, as I often post things there before the podcast comes out. And if you've just recently become under a shelter-at-home order, let me give you some encouragement. There's an article out here a day ago that says here in the San Francisco Bay Area, doctors are starting to see the curve flatten out after about 2.5 weeks of the counties being shut down. I've been home now for over 3 weeks, and some of the big companies sent people home nearly 4 weeks ago. So hang in there. So the big question is, what are you going to be doing while you are at home? Well, I think I've mentioned to you in the past that my club has permitted solo flights, so you can go out and fly on your own. They don't permit dual flight instruction. In fact, I've read that there is a ban on VFR flight in some countries in Europe, so they really don't want you flying there. What I've been doing, well, besides working on some big writing projects I've got going, I've been doing some ground instruction via Zoom, which is great because that's something that can be done relatively well over the internet. And if you're working on a private or an instrument, there are about 10 different ground instruction topics that have to be signed off by an instructor and pasted into your logbook before your check ride. So ground instruction is certainly something that can be done. Speaking of which, if you do want any consulting or ground instruction from me, let me know. I'm happy to work with you via Zoom or FaceTime or anything else. What other things could you be doing? If you don't have an account already on FAAsafety.gov, I'd encourage you to go out there and create an account for yourself. They have lots of free online courses, and they will also give you credit toward the WINGS program, which we've talked about here in the past. The WINGS program is an alternative to doing a flight review. So when you do the online courses and then show up to fly with your flight instructor, you don't have to do the ground portion of the flight review. You do have to follow a specific syllabus, which is a little bit different from a flight review where you can do anything you want basically during that hour. And the FAA loves the WINGS program. One of our local safety inspectors here referred to it as a get-out-of-jail-free card, and he explained by saying that if you have a violation and you participated in the WINGS program, usually they're just going to treat that as something where you get remedial training. They're not going to go after you in a big way. So think about working on the WINGS program while you're at home. You can, of course, also study for written exams if you have a check ride coming up. And also study for the oral exams. If you're working on your private or your instrument, I recommend the oral study guides, which are available at asa2fly.com. That's the number 2. The blue book for the private guide is excellent, as is the little red book that they've got for instrument check rides. Now, what if you're not working on check rides and you're just thinking about remaining proficient? Well, I know this may sound hard to believe, but experts say that chair flying is actually a great way to get inexpensive and yet valuable experience. And if you're wondering why that is, many years ago I read about a psychology experiment with Alan Richardson from Australia, a psychologist. He chose 3 groups of students at random, and what he had them do was throw basketballs. Now, none of them had practiced a visualization prior to this. The first group practiced free throws every day for 20 days. The second group made free throws on the first day and the 20th day, as did the third group. But members of the third group spent 20 minutes every day just visualizing free throws. If they missed, they practiced getting the shot right. And on the 20th day, Richardson measured the percentage of improvement in each group. The group that practiced daily improved 24%. The second group improved not at all because they just practiced on day 1 and day 20. And the third group which had not physically practiced any more than the second group, did 23% better, almost as good as the first group. So in other words, visualizing was almost as good as practicing, and they said that it worked particularly well for people who just would visualize actually feeling the ball in their hands and actually hearing it bounce in addition to actually trying to see it go through the hoop. So how does that apply for flight training? Well, to get the most out of it, what you want to do is find a quiet place, close your eyes, and then just take a few moments to get yourself into the zone. Imagine you're in the cockpit, just visualize yourself looking around, feeling for the seat belts, hearing them click into place. Reach down, slide that seat forward and hear the seat click into place. And then reach up over the cockpit, hands on the switches, and listen to the self-tests that might be performed by the avionics. And then as you're flying, just imagine you're making radio calls and making small changes to the yoke and the rudder, retracting the gear if you have it, loading instrument approaches if you fly instruments, and then just add small details like hearing the engine sound every time you make small throttle changes. Try and make it as realistic as you can. So for example, I always tell folks, imagine that you're on final, and don't just imagine it's perfectly flown final, but imagine you've been blown a little bit to the left, and now you can visualize yourself correcting to get back onto course. If you use the crab method, you'd be turning the aircraft to the right to get back on course. If you were using the side slip method, you might lower the right wing and push some left foot and left rudder to get back on course. And then, of course, as you come up on the center line, you're going to reduce those inputs so that you stay on the center line. You can also imagine as you're getting closer to the ground that the wind decreases and that you need less wind correction. So you can use this time productively, and that will help you with your proficiency even if you're not able to fly for some period of time. And what else can you do at home? Well, you can be reading about aviation accidents. I have been a student of accidents from the very early years that I've been a pilot, more than 40 years now, and I've learned a tremendous amount, and my goal has been to learn as much as possible about ways that other pilots have gotten into trouble so that I can hopefully learn from that and not repeat those mistakes. Well, I used to always go out to the ntsb.gov website to search for these. I got an email from Miklos Kazari. He is one of our Patreon supporters for the show, and he has been working hard on a new app called Aviation Accidents. You can get a free 7-day trial to it. Then after that, it's $9.95 a year. He sent me a trial. And basically, the app is really great. There are 2 tabs at the bottom, one labeled Ntsb Database and the other labeled Final Reports. Under both of those tabs, they're fully searchable. And the default is that they show you the most recent accidents, either the preliminary reports in the first tab or the final reports under the second tab. And I decided to look at the first report in both categories, and coincidentally, they were both for a Cessna 208 Caravan. Now, about 12 years ago, I spent a week at Flight Safety doing sim training for the 208, and I have about 70 hours flying in the Caravan. And the Cessna 208 product manager was also in some of our classes at Flight Safety. I recall him telling us that the PT-6 turboprop in that aircraft is so reliable that they go about 1 million hours between events where there's some kind of an engine problem, and that most of those are actually either pilot-induced or caused by a maintenance error. So I was kind of surprised when I opened up the app to see 2 accident reports for the 208, so I decided to read them, and I thought you might find them interesting. So I'll read a little bit from each of them. The first one, the preliminary report, was for an accident that occurred just a few weeks ago on March 5th in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. The aircraft was being operated under Part 135, and the incident occurred at 8:15 a.m. in the morning. It reads, the pilot reported that upon reaching the decision altitude on a GPS instrument approach, he saw the runway end identifier lights and continued the approach. Shortly thereafter, the lights disappeared and then reappeared. He continued the approach and landing, thinking he was lining up with the runway by using the runway edge lights for reference. Upon touching down, the airplane dug into the snow and flipped over, resulting in substantial damage to the wings and tail. The airplane landed about 225 feet left of the runway. The pilot reported no mechanical malfunctions or anomalies that would have precluded normal operation. Well, an obvious problem there. Anytime you're flying an instrument approach, once you reach minimums and have the runway in sight and decide to land, if you later lose sight of the lights of the runway, you need to go around. And obviously a timely go around or a missed approach can prevent many, many, many accidents. Now, the other accident was a final report for a crash that occurred way back on September 27th in 2018 near Japan. In Miklos's app, it has a summary and links to the full report from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau. But when I later went out to the website and looked up the same accident the way I normally would on the ntsb.gov website, it had just a very brief summary, and the full narrative report wasn't there. So kudos to Miklos for finding that report and linking it into his app. It says the pilot of a Cessna 208B aircraft, register VH-FAY, was contracted by the aircraft operator to ferry FAY from Jandakot Airport in Western Australia to Mississippi here in the United States. On the morning of September 27th, the aircraft departed Saipan International Airport, Northern Marianas Island, for a planned flight to New Chitos Airport in Hokkaido, Japan. After climbing for about an hour, the aircraft leveled off at flight level 220. After 2 hours and 20 minutes flight time, the pilot contacted Tokyo Radio Flight Information Service at the first mandatory reporting position. The aircraft passed the next reporting point at the same altitude 1 hour and 20 minutes later, but the pilot did not contact Tokyo Radio as expected. Tokyo Radio made repeated attempts to communicate with the pilot without success. Having received no communications from the pilot for 4.5 hours, two Japan Air Self-Defense Force aircraft intercepted FAY. The pilot did not maneuver the aircraft in response in accordance with international intercept protocols. After about 30 minutes, the JSDF pilots observed FAY descending into cloud. The aircraft descended rapidly and disappeared from radar less than 2 minutes later. Within 2 hours, search and rescue personnel located the aircraft's rear passenger door. No other aircraft parts were located, and the pilot was not found. The ATSB's findings: while the aircraft was in cruise on autopilot, the pilot almost certainly became incapacitated and did not recover. About 5 hours after the last position report, without pilot intervention to select fuel tanks, the aircraft's engine stopped. Likely due to fuel starvation, this resulted in the aircraft entering an uncontrolled descent into the ocean. The cause of incapacitation could not be determined. While a medical event could not be ruled out, the pilot was operating alone in an unpressurized aircraft at 22,000 feet and probably using an unsuitable oxygen system, which increased the risk of experiencing hypoxia and being unable to recover. Which is kind of interesting timing, because just about a week ago, a client was asking me about the SR20T, which can fly up to flight level 250, and whether there had been any incidents with pilots becoming incapacitated. And I told him, yes, I could think of 2 or maybe 3 incidents. One I know was in a Mooney, one was in a Cirrus SR22, and in both cases it seemed that apparently the oxygen hose may have gotten kinked and the pilot became incapacitated. I think the time to consciousness at that level is probably on the order of 2 to 3 minutes. If you're up around 35,000 feet, now you're probably down to 20 to 30 seconds. So you'll go unconscious pretty quickly if you don't have oxygen at those levels. So if you're interested in learning more about Miklos's app, just go out to www.accidents.app, and you can also, of course, find it in the Apple App Store. And I would like to take a moment to say a big, big, big thank you to many of you, because I have not been teaching for over 3 weeks, and I think it's likely that it's going to be another month before I'm back in the cockpit teaching flying. And frankly, that's where most of my income comes from. So I have to tell you, I'm really thankful for the many of you who support this show through Patreon and PayPal, because it literally now pays the mortgage. So thank you so much for supporting the show, because this support in the past, well, it's been a nice supplement, but now it's actually the majority of my income. It'll remain that way until I get back into the sky. So thank you to everyone who supports this show. It really means a lot to me, especially at a time like this. And if you've been thinking, yes, I love this show and I've been meaning to sign up to support it, well, what's stopping you? I mean, it's easy to do, and it will only take you a couple of minutes. And yes, I'll read your name on the show, or if you'd prefer, I'll read your kid's name. Plus, we have lots of goodies for people who sign up for the show through Patreon at the various levels. To support the show, you probably know how to do it. Just go out to aviationnewstalk/awesome, since you're all awesome listeners, or you can also go to aviationnewstalk.com/Patreon. Either one will take you to our Patreon site, or go to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. Now, at either site, you can make a monthly donation via credit card, or if you'd like to make a one-time contribution, you can do that via PayPal. And there are links to both of these sites in the show notes, so just go to the show notes and touch the links, and you won't even have to type in the web addresses that I just gave you. And I'd like to thank the 2 new Patreon supporters who signed up in the past week. They include Thomas Matthews. He added his pledge up to $4 a month, and to Keith Lemon, who's donating at the $20 a month level. Thank you so very much. Now, we also have mega supporters, and I read their name during every news show. These people donate $50 a month or more, and I'll send them one of my books after 2 months. Those mega supporters are Brian Deere, who lives here in Northern California and flies a Turbo 206. Tyson Weiss, co-founder of 4Flight. Victor Vogel, just talked to him on the phone. He lives in Central PA and flies a Cirrus. Tim Delaney, flying for nearly 50 years and flies an SR20 in Northern California. Stephen Elop, up in the Northwest, flies a Turbo 182 and a Citation CJ3+. He's now the CEO of API Jet. Mike Williams, he's the president of Keomac and also TCB Composites, which make composite spinners and bulkheads for GA aircraft. Seth Lake, he's a relatively new DPE giving check rides down in Arkansas. Also has a program to help you get your multi-engine rating in his beach Travel Air. His website's at vsl.aero. Rick Miller instructs in the Cincinnati area out of the Lincoln Flight Training Center. Also flies with individuals that own their own Pipers, Cessnas, Beechcraft, and Cicadas. He still has a day job, but he says he wants to teach full-time sometime. Justin Winter, he brokers real estate on Lake Keowee in South Carolina. He flies a SR22. Carl and Ann Rossi, just had an email from Carl a few minutes ago. They're the proud owners and operators of 3 Cessna T240 aircraft. Johnny McDade, singer-songwriter, musician, and record producer, who I met up with in the LA area a month or two ago. Jim Goldfuss has just returned from a long break from flying. He's working to get his CFI, II, and MEI, as he would like to instruct full-time on Long Island. Charlie Mason flies out of Santa Monica, and he's been out of flying for a long time, but he's now getting checked out in a Cirrus SR20. Vincent Salimi, he's the council member from the city of Pinole. He's also the owner of Salimi Construction Management in San Francisco, California. Stephen Smart flies a Pilatus PC-12 for Part 135 Air Ambulance in Arkansas. He's a company instructor and check airman, also flies a Piper Meridian. Jim Hopp, flight instructor here in San Francisco area, teaches at Advantage Aviation at the Palo Alto Airport. Lars Litjens, he's our youngest Patreon supporter. He's still flying a simulator these days. He's looking forward to someday getting a license and flying his dad's 206. Dad, by the way, sells boats in several western states at boulderboats.com. Joseph Sheehan flew in the Navy for 8 years, and he's been flying for the past 8 years on an SR-22, and he's looking to pick up a brand new Vision Jet within another month or so. Josiah Freeman, working on his instrument rating. And our newest mega supporter, Dylan Caldwell. He is an AME. He's a doctor in Florida at the Naples Municipal Airport. So if you need a medical, either basic med, second or third class physical, you can contact him at aviatorsclinic.com. And I'd like to thank everyone who supports this show in whatever way you do. Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking about Ntsb 830 and what you have to do when an accident occurs. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's talk about 3 things to do immediately when reporting an accident, all per Ntsb 830. Now, actually, 2 of them are immediate, and the third one comes later. The 3 things you have to do are, number 1, notify the NTSB immediately of an accident or a serious incident. 2, the operator of the aircraft is responsible for preserving all wreckage to the extent possible. And 3, the operator is required to file a report about any accident, though that can be done up to 10 days later. Now let's dive into the details. NTSB, of course, is National Transportation Safety Board, and 830 is the number of the regulation that spells out the requirements for making notifications or not making them whenever you have an accident or incident. Now, just a quick little bit of history on the NTSB. Back in 1967, Congress created the Department of Transportation, and they moved the Federal Aviation Administration into this new DOT. At the same time, the NTSB was established as an independent agency investigating domestic aviation accidents. Prior to that, accidents were investigated by the Bureau of Aviation Safety. And from 1967 to 1975, the NTSB was also part of DOT while conducting investigations into the FAA, which is also a DOT agency. So you can imagine that was a little uncomfortable at times. So to minimize potential conflicts, Congress passed the Independent Safety Board Act, and in 1975, the NTSB became a fully independent agency. Since then, they've investigated over 140,000 aviation incidents and accidents. Now, pilots should be familiar with NTSB 830, which, by the way, is relatively short and easy to read. And by the way, how often do you hear that said about federal regulations? But there are other NTSB regulations as well. So specifically, Part 830, those are the rules that pertain to the reporting of accidents and incidents and the preservation of wreckage. Part 831 relates to aircraft accident and incident investigation procedures. And Part 845, those are the rules for transportation accident and incident hearings and reports. Now, often you'll hear on the news that the FAA, not the NTSB, is investigating an accident. And sometimes that is the case, as the FAA also has investigation powers. Let's talk first how investigations are organized. The NTSB conducts investigations using what they call a party system. Now, the FAA has automatically granted party status to all NTSB investigations. Other parties may include aircraft manufacturers, operators, or other organizations that can contribute to the investigation. Participants will be organized into groups such as aircraft operations, maintenance, human factors, recorders, etc. FAA personnel led by the FAA Aviation Safety Inspector as the FAA Party Coordinator may also be assigned to participate in any of these groups. The NTSB also has additional responsibilities. The NTSB is responsible for the organization, conduct, and control of all accidents and incident investigations involving any civil aircraft or certain public aircraft within the U.S., its territories, possessions, and also those that occur outside the U.S. when the accident or incident is not in the territory of another country, for example, in international waters. The NTSB is responsible for supporting accident incident investigations that occur outside the U.S. and its territories, which involve U.S. manufactured or operated aircraft in accordance with ICAO Annex 13 accident investigation agreements. Now, these days, in most instances involving non-fatal accidents, the NTSB will not travel to the accident scene to conduct its investigation, and instead they will rely on the FAA to document the scene. And finally, because both the NTSB and the FAA have independent statutory authority, as well as different rules and mandates, differences in the requirements of the two agencies may arise during an accident or incident investigation. And in those cases, the FAA has to comply with Part 831.5 and not interfere with the NTSB investigation. Conversely, the NTSB cannot prohibit or interfere with FAA's actions required to ensure the continuing safety of the national airspace system, as the FAA has the authority to conduct investigations concerning aviation safety. Now let's get to the text of NTSB 830. We'll start with point 1, which is applicability. And let me point out that when reporting an accident or incident, you may have to become involved twice. Once to make the initial notification, which may have to be made immediately, and later you may have to make a report where you give full details, and you'll hear that in the first sentence. So reading from 830.1, this part contains rules pertaining to A, the initial notification and later reporting of aircraft incidents and accidents and certain other occurrences in the operation of aircraft wherever they occur when they involve civil aircraft, so not military aircraft, of the United States when they involve certain public aircraft as specified in this part, wherever they occur, and when they involve foreign civil aircraft where those events occur in the United States, its territories, or its possessions. Now, this part also contains rules pertaining to B, the preservation of aircraft wreckage, mail, cargo, and records involving all civil and certain public aircraft accidents as specified in this part in the United States and its territories or possessions. And that's it. That's all there is to NTSB 830.1. 830.2 is a little longer and more interesting because it does a great job of defining almost every word you'll later find in the regulations. And here we go. As used in this part, the following words or phrases are defined as follows. Aircraft accident means an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft which takes place between the time any person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight and all such persons have disembarked. So you can see by that definition, if a mechanic is moving an airplane and bangs into another aircraft, that can't be called an accident because there was no intention of flight. So, an aircraft accident means an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft which takes place from the time a person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight and all such persons have disembarked, and in which any person suffers death or serious injury, or in which the aircraft receives substantial damage. For purposes of this part, the definition of aircraft accident includes unmanned aircraft accidents, which means UAVs, so drones are now investigated by the NTSB. Moving along, civil aircraft means any aircraft other than a public aircraft. Fatal injury. Now, I bet you thought you knew what a fatal injury is, but here's how the NTSB defines a fatal injury. It means any injury which results in death within 30 days of the accident. Incident means an occurrence other than an accident associated with the operation of an aircraft, which affects or could affect the safety of operations. So the key takeaway from that is, if something happens in an airplane and it doesn't meet the very narrow definition of an accident, like, for example, the mechanic taxiing, then it's automatically an incident. Operator means any person who causes or authorizes the operation of an aircraft, such as the owner, lessee, or bailee of an aircraft. Public aircraft means an aircraft used only for the U.S. government or an aircraft owned and operated, except for commercial purposes, or exclusively leased for at least 90 continuous days by a government other than the U.S. government, including a state, the District of Columbia, a territory, or possession of the U.S., or a political subdivision of that government. And then it goes on in considerable detail about exceptions that don't meet the definition of a public aircraft, and we'll just skip over that. Serious injury. Now, this is even more complicated than the definition of a fatal injury. Serious injury means any injury which, 1, requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours, commencing within 7 days from the date of the injury was received. 2, results in a fracture of any bone, except simple fractures of fingers, toes, or nose. 3, causes severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, or tendon damage. 4, involves any internal organs. Or 5, involves second or third degree burns or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body surface. Substantial damage, which we know is required for an incident to be an accident. Substantial damage means damage or failure which adversely affects the structural strength, performance, or flight characteristics of the aircraft, and which would normally require major repair or replacement of the affected components. Engine failure, or damage limited to an engine if only one engine fails or is damaged, bent fairings or cowling, dented skin, small punctured holes in the skin or fabric, ground damage to rotor or propeller blades, and damage to landing gear, wheels, tires, flaps, engine accessories, brakes, or wingtips are not considered substantial damage for the purpose of this part. And I'll just add that in most cases, you might think of a gear-up landing as being a pretty major event, but that's not usually going to be considered substantial damage and hence not an accident, even if it costs you more than $50,000 to fix the airplane, because you haven't damaged the wing spar or anything else that's related to the structural strength of the plane, which of course is the first part of the definition of substantial damage. And finally, in the definitions, unmanned aircraft accident. Yes, this means drones, and this is a section that was added just a couple of years ago. Unmanned aircraft accident means an occurrence associated with the operation of any public or civil unmanned aircraft system that takes place between the time that the system is activated with the purpose of flight and the time that the system is deactivated at the conclusion of its mission, in which 1, any person suffers death or serious injury, or 2, the aircraft has a maximum gross takeoff weight of 300 pounds or greater and sustains substantial damage. So those are the definitions. Let's now look at 830.5 immediate notification. The operator of any civil aircraft or any public aircraft not operated by the armed forces or an intelligence agency of the U.S. or any foreign aircraft shall immediately, and by the most expeditious means available, notify the Nares NTSB office. To report an accident or incident, you may call the NTSB Response Operations Center at 844-373-9922 or 202-314-6290. And then it tells you all of the categories for which you must make immediate notification. A, an aircraft accident or any of the following listed serious incidents. 1, flight control malfunction or failure. 2, inability of any required flight crew member to perform normal flight operations as a result of injury or illness. 3, failure of any internal turbine engine component that results in the escape of debris other than out the exhaust path. 4, in-flight fire. 5, aircraft collision in flight. 6, damage to property other than the aircraft estimated to exceed $25,000 for repair, including materials and labor, or fair market value in the event of total loss, whichever is less. 7, for large multi-engine aircraft, those that are more than 12,500 pounds, So all of these things we're about to read, you don't have to report them unless it's in a big airplane where these things occur. 1, in-flight failure of electrical systems. Well, that's good because I can remember lots of in-flight failures I've had in electrical systems in older aircraft. But in a large aircraft, it has to be reported immediately. So in-flight failure of electrical systems, which requires the sustained use of an emergency bus powered by a backup source, such as battery, auxiliary power unit, or air-driven generator to retain flight control or essential instruments. 2, in-flight failure of hydraulic systems that results in sustained reliance on the sole remaining hydraulic or mechanical system for movement of flight control surfaces. 3, sustained loss of the power or thrust produced by 2 or more engines. And 4, an evacuation of an aircraft in which an emergency egress system is utilized. And now we go back to other items requiring immediate notification, but not necessarily having to be in large, heavy aircraft. So number 8, this would apply for any aircraft, release of all or a portion of a propeller blade from an aircraft, excluding release caused by ground contact. 9, a complete loss of information, excluding flickering from more than 50% of an aircraft cockpit's displays, known as 1, electronic flight instrument systems, 2, engine indication and crew alerting systems, 3, electronic centralized aircraft monitor displays, or 4, other displays of this type, which generally include a primary flight display or PFD, primary navigation display or PND, and other integrated displays. 10, airborne collision and avoidance system, so that's ACAS, resolution advisory is issued when an aircraft is being operated on an instrument flight rules flight plan, and compliance with the advisory is necessary to avert a substantial risk of collision between 2 or more aircraft. So that's a relatively new rule. That basically means anytime a TCAS system gives an RA, a resolution advisory, and those, of course, must be followed, that has to be reported now to the NTSB. Number 11, damage to helicopter tail or main rotor blades, including ground damage that requires major repair or replacement of the blades. 12, any event in which an operator, when operating an airplane as an air carrier at a public use airport on land, does any of the following. Number 1, lands or departs on a taxiway, incorrect runway, or other area not designed as a runway. Or 2, experiences a runway incursion that requires the operator or the crew of another aircraft or vehicle to take immediate corrective action to avoid a collision. And finally, B, an aircraft is overdue and is believed to have been involved in an accident. So all of these things require immediate notification to the NTSB. Okay, next up, 830.6. It's pretty short, and it tells you what information to be given in a notification. The notification required in 830.5 shall contain the following information: type, nationality, and registration marks of the aircraft, name of the owner and operator of the aircraft, name of the pilot in command, date and time of the accident, last point of departure and point of intended landing of the aircraft, position of the aircraft with reference to some easily defined geographical point, number of persons aboard, number killed and number seriously injured, nature of the accident, the weather, and the extent of damage to the aircraft so far as known, and a description of any explosives, radioactive materials, or other dangerous articles carried. And now 830.10, that's preservation of aircraft wreckage, mail, cargo, and records. A, the operator of an aircraft involved in an accident or incident for which notification must be given is responsible for preserving to the extent possible any aircraft wreckage, cargo, and mail aboard the aircraft, and all records, including all recording mediums of flight. That would sound like the flight data recorder, maintenance and voice recorders pertaining to the operation and maintenance of the aircraft and to the airman until the board takes custody thereof or a release is granted pursuant to 831.12b of this chapter. B, prior to the time the board or its authorized representatives take custody of aircraft wreckage, mail, or cargo, such wreckage, mail, or cargo may not be disturbed or moved, except to the extent necessary to 1, to remove persons injured or trapped, 2, to protect the wreckage from further damage, or 3, to protect the public from injury. C, where it is necessary to move aircraft wreckage, mail, or cargo, sketches, descriptive notes, and photographs shall be made if possible of the original positions and condition of the wreckage and any significant impact marks. And finally, D, the operator of an aircraft involved in an accident or incident shall retain all records, reports, internal documents, and memoranda dealing with the accident or incident until authorized by the board to the contrary. And now this is the last section. This is 830.15, has to do with the reports and statements to be filed. A. Reports. The operator of a civil, public, or foreign aircraft shall file a report on board form 6120 within 10 days after an accident or after 7 days if an overdue aircraft is still missing. A report on an incident for which immediate notification is required shall be filed only as requested by an authorized representative of the board. Crew member statement. Each crew member, if physically able at the time the report is submitted, shall attach a statement setting forth the facts, conditions, and circumstances relating to the accident or incident as they appear to him. If the crew member is incapacitated, he shall submit their statement as soon as he is physically able. And finally, where to file the reports. The operator of an aircraft shall file any reports with the field office or the board nearest the accident or incident. Well, there you have it. Let's just review the 3 things you have to do if you have an accident or incident. 1, notify the Ntsb immediately of an accident or a serious incident. 2, the operator of the aircraft is responsible for preserving all wreckage to the extent possible. And 3, the operator is required to file a report about any accident, though that can be up to 10 days later. And frankly, you're unlikely to remember all of these details, so the most important thing to remember is if you ever have an accident or incident, remember to go look up Ntsb 830 to refresh your memory on just what you need to do. Coming up next, listener feedback right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let's get to some feedback. And after that, I've got some closing thoughts on the rather interesting times that we're living in right now. First, an email from Patrick. He says, in the current episode, you wondered what happened to the moose that took down a helicopter in Utah. And actually, it was an elk. But Patrick, thanks for sending along this article. It says that they were trying to net the elk, sedate it, and fly it back to put a collar on it for further study by a biologist. And Patrick also continued. He says, by the way, you mentioned iPad-related problems. A few years ago, I was taking off from Wendover, Utah, that's Kenv, on a moonless night. Taking off to the east, it was as if I were taking off into a black hole. The only lights on the ground are those from the occasional vehicle on Interstate 80. And I've been to Wendover, and it's true. It is really kind of an island unto itself. There's just no light around there for miles in many directions. Anyway, he said, I was new to iPads and still getting over the gee whiz of my spiffy new electronic toy. At some point, shortly after liftoff, as I was climbing out, I looked down at the iPad. I don't remember why I was looking at it, but I do remember looking back up and not seeing I-80 down and to the left. Rather, it was high up and to the right. Talk about an unusual attitude. Funny, you might know how little things from the past can sometimes jump to the fore. Decades before, when I was working on my instrument ticket, my instructor would often say, trust your instruments. So it was at that moment when I was seriously in one heck of a bank and headed down that I literally yelled, trust your instruments. And using those instruments righted the plane, which made it possible to send this email today. Great podcast as always. Patrick, thanks so much. And boy, I'm really glad that worked out. And yes, trust your instruments. And here's an email from John, also about the same episode. He says, my comment is regarding the piece on the aircraft crash with the pilot trying to net an elk. My first flight instructor in Alaska runs a very successful helicopter operation with his wife that spans throughout Alaska and all over the western U.S. They use Robinson R-44s and MD-500s to capture a broad variety of animals in conjunction with state and federal wildlife departments. This is primarily for research, disease testing, and translocation. This is very high-risk flying, which often involves flying low over mountainous terrain while the biologists are looking for animals and executing a humane capture of the animals to facilitate a quick release. As you can imagine, these flights don't always end up as hoped for. See quicksilver.com for some older photos of how they operate. Unfortunately, the website isn't very current. Their business has not needed to market itself much as they are known as one of the safest Part 135, 133 carriers in this highly specialized field. Love your podcast. Thanks, John. John, thanks so much for that. And now just a few final thoughts on these tough times we're going through. Yes, they are unprecedented, at least in our lifetime. Though we've seen shades of this in the past with things like polio. And I remember as a small child lining up with a long line of other kids for the polio vaccine, which eventually wiped out that horrible disease that disabled and killed many people. You know, we got through that, and we will get through this. And I think we'll do it pretty much the same way we did then, with the help of medical experts and a lot of healthcare workers on the front lines. So be a little extra patient with people in your life because not everyone may be able to handle this as well as you can. And Certainly pitch in to help wherever you can. I know there are going to be a lot of problems in the short term, but I know this. People are resilient and they're flexible in adapting to change, and we'll all figure out how to get through this. And if there's anything I can do to help you, just email me at aviationnewstalk@gmail.com or leave me a voicemail at 650-967-2500. So stay healthy, stay home, stay positive, unless you're tested, of course, in which case, stay negative. See you next week and keep the blue side up.